I woke up in a hospital bed with dry lips, a dull ache in my chest, and a fluorescent ceiling buzzing above me. But none of that compared to what I heard next. "Why keep him alive?" Her voice, cold, surgical. My daughter-in-law, Paige, standing at the foot of the bed talking to the doctor like I was a used couch, like I wasn't there. The doctor said something in a low voice, but I didn't catch it. My ears were full of blood. My son, Matthew, was nowhere in sight. That's when I realized this wasn't about my health. It was about convenience, about control, about money. My name is Frank Delaney. I'm 68 years old. I live in Albany, New York. And until 2 weeks ago, I thought I had a loving family. I thought I was just getting older, slowing down, maybe a little crankier than I used to be. But I never thought I'd become a problem to be solved, a line item to be deleted, not by strangers, not by my own kin. That moment, those 5 words, shattered something in me. And now I can't stop thinking about the trust fund I set up 15 years ago, when Matthew was still working 2 jobs and Paige was pregnant with their first. It was supposed to protect the family from hardship. Now I see it was a loaded gun left on the table, and someone just decided to pick it up. Before I tell you the rest, let me ask something. Where are you watching this from? I don't mean your city, I mean your life. Are you the father trying to stay relevant? The son trying to manage too much? Or are you the Paige in someone's story, calculating what's yours before it's even free to give? I never meant to become the villain in my daughter-in-law's eyes. I paid off their first mortgage. I babysat the grandkids. I taught Matthew how to drive, how to tie a tie, how to grieve after his mother, my wife, died too young. And now, all I am to her is an obstacle. I lay in that hospital bed pretending to sleep while Paige argued on the phone in the hallway. She didn't know I could hear. He's not competent to manage his own finances. I've seen the will. If he dies before transferring the trust, it defaults to Matthew. That's the safest route. The safest route. She didn't know I revised the trust after his 40th birthday. She didn't know I named a successor trustee. She didn't know I could still move a pen when I needed to. When Matthew finally arrived, nervous, distracted, I saw the truth in his eyes. He didn't know Paige had said those words. He still thought I was his father. But I saw the way he flinched when I asked him to bring my briefcase from home, the way he stalled, the way he avoided eye contact when I said, "The green folder, you know the one." He knew. He just didn't want me to have it. That night, I pretended to sleep again while the nurse checked my vitals. Paige didn't visit. Matthew left early. And I lay there with the kind of clarity you only get after someone tries to erase you. I may be 68, I may walk with a cane, but I built this family's fortune with handwritten contracts and 12-hour days. And I'm not dead yet. No one erases me that easily. The ride home from the hospital was quiet. Matthew drove like he always had, cautious, hands at 10 and 2, checking the mirrors too often, the way I taught him. But he never once looked at me. Not really. Just flicked glances in the rearview mirror like I was a passenger he didn't know what to say to. When we pulled up to the house, Paige was already on the porch with the kids. She gave me a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Welcome back," she said. No hug, no warmth. Just the kind of hospitality you offer a tenant you're trying to evict politely. I stepped inside slowly. My body was healing, but my mind was awake in a way it hadn't been in years. There was no green folder on the desk. I asked Matthew about it once we were alone. "The briefcase," I said. "The green folder inside. Where is it?" He scratched the back of his neck, looked toward the hallway where Paige had disappeared. "I couldn't find it. Maybe you misplaced it before the hospital." That was the first lie. He was always a bad liar, even as a kid. His mouth tightened a little too much. His eyes blinked too fast. I didn't press it. I just nodded and said, "Maybe." But later that night, when they thought I was asleep on the recliner, I crept into the garage where I'd kept an old locked file cabinet under a tarp. Paige used to call it junk. I called it insurance. Inside, still intact, were two things: a photocopy of the original trust documents and a second, updated version I filed after Matthew turned 40. In the margins, my own handwriting. In blue ink. Undeniably mine. That's when I saw it. A name crossed out. In pencil, not pen. Next to successor trustee, someone had scribbled a change. A different name. Paige's. I stood there in the dark, the air thick with motor oil and dust, and I realized something I had never wanted to admit. She had gone deeper than I thought. I didn't rage. I didn't confront her. That's what she'd expect. No. When people try to erase you, you don't yell. You write. You document. You prepare. By sunrise, I had already made a list in my notebook. 1. Bank login reset. 2. Call Stephen Rosen, my old paralegal, retired, but still sharp. 3. Safe deposit box. Relocate contents. 4. Schedule lunch with Rachel Abrams, trusty attorney, loyal, discreet. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the kitchen with a mug of cold coffee, listening to the house creak. And it creaked differently now. Every whisper from down the hall sounded like a plan. Every laugh behind a closed door felt like a deal being made. They thought I was fragile, confused, nearing the end. What they didn't know was that I had built every wall around them, and if I had to, I could tear them down, brick by brick. I met Rachel at the old diner on Madison and Fifth, the kind of place where the coffee is burnt and the waitress calls you "hun" without meaning it. That's why I picked it. Familiar, unremarkable, invisible. She walked in wearing a navy suit and a guarded smile. Still had that same straight-backed posture I drilled into her when she was a law clerk in her 20s. Now she was in her 40s, respected, with a sharper edge in her voice than I remembered. "Frank," she said, sliding into the booth. "Didn't expect to hear from you. Thought you were enjoying retirement." "I was," I said, "until someone tried to bury me alive." I laid it out over dry toast and cold eggs. Paige, the comment at the hospital. The green folder, the pencil markings, the trust. Rachel didn't interrupt. She just listened, the way good lawyers do. Calm on the outside, calculations behind the eyes. When I finished, she sat back and crossed her arms. "Do you have proof the documents were tampered with?" "Yes," I said. "Not enough for court. Yet. But enough to know where this is heading." She nodded slowly. "You want me to get ahead of it?" "No," I said. "I want you to help me burn the bridge before they cross it." She smiled, just a little. "I'm in." Back at home, things had changed. Paige started hovering. She checked my pill bottles twice a day. She asked what I ate when I slept. She offered to help with bills. At first it looked like concern. But I'd been a lawyer too long not to recognize preparation. She was building a case. Every conversation was shorter, more polite, but underneath it all, I could feel her tracking me, watching for mistakes, waiting for signs of weakness. That night she asked me if I'd ever considered downsizing. "You know, Frank," she said, slicing carrots in the kitchen, "that big house of yours, maybe it's too much now. Have you thought about moving into a place with help? Just for peace of mind." I smiled. "Whose peace of mind, Paige?" She didn't answer. Instead, she poured wine, kissed Matthew on the cheek, and walked upstairs like nothing had happened. But I saw it clearly now. This wasn't just Paige being ambitious. This was a siege. And what she didn't know was that while she was laying traps, I was quietly replacing the floor beneath her feet. Rachel and I had agreed on the next steps. quiet notifications to banks, a formal letter revoking any unauthorized changes, a private investigator, just in case. The house creaked again that night. Different than before, it no longer sounded like betrayal, it sounded like warning. And I listened. It started with the calendar. A red circle around my next doctor's appointment, except I never marked it. Then came the reminders taped to the fridge. Take your pills, don't forget breakfast, call Matthew if confused. Paige called it helpful. I called it planting seeds. She was building the narrative, the slow erosion of my mind. A soft campaign of concern meant to look loving to outsiders, but sinister to anyone who'd lived through more than 5 decades of cross-examinations and contested wills. One night I overheard her whispering in the kitchen. "I think he's slipping," she said into the phone. "He asked me the same question 3 times this morning. He's been forgetting names. It's just not safe anymore with the kids around." She didn't know I was standing in the hallway with a small digital recorder tucked in my bathrobe. The next day I called Dr. Martin Stein. Martin and I went to law school together before he switched to medicine. He was the best neurologist in Albany before retiring 2 years ago. Still sharp as glass. Still owed me a favor. We met at his home office. Quiet, no records, no insurance companies, just a man with a clipboard and a long memory of who I was. He ran the tests, reflexes, memory recall, pattern recognition, word association, the whole battery. At the end he looked at me and said, "Frank, if your brain was a gun, it's still fully loaded." I smiled. "Write it down, sign it, date it." "I'll pay cash." I took the signed report and drove straight to a storage unit on the outskirts of town, one I'd rented under a different name years ago when I was still working. Inside were old files, a safe, and now a growing folder labeled Paige, Misconduct Evidence. Rachel called that afternoon. "I've confirmed it," she said. "There's been a legal inquiry, anonymous, but it came from someone using a firm Paige once interned at. They're poking around the trust language." So it was starting. She wasn't just trying to make me look old and confused. She was preparing to challenge the documents, to take everything under the guise of care. And she wasn't doing it alone. That night at dinner, Paige asked if I remembered to turn off the stove earlier. "Of course," I said. "And I locked the garage, and I didn't wet the bed." "Want to check that too?" Matthew choked on his water. The kids giggled. Paige's smile tightened like a rope pulling at both corners of her mouth. She was used to silence, but I wasn't going to give her that anymore. Later I updated the log in my notebook. Paige confusion comment, 7:43 p.m. Calendar altered, again. Kitchen wall, phone, check. Outbound calls to unknown legal office, matched to former employer. Everything documented, everything dated. And now, everything safe. She was closing in. But I was no longer standing still. There's a sound a man learns to hear after raising a son and burying a wife. It's the sound of strategy disguised as concern. I heard it clearly in Paige's voice one morning as she spoke to Matthew just outside the kitchen door. "He left the stove on again," she whispered. "I'm just saying, what if something happens while the kids are there?" I sat quietly at the breakfast table, coffee in hand, toast untouched. She didn't know I'd already been to the doctor that week, didn't know I'd handed him a signed neurological assessment from Dr. Martin Stein, didn't know it was filed in my medical chart under restricted access, and didn't know I'd requested a printout of every note she'd submitted on my behalf. Because that's the thing about control. They only get it if you hand it over, and I don't hand over a damn thing I didn't mean to. That afternoon, I stopped by Rachel's office. She had cleared her schedule for me. We sat in her back conference room, surrounded by quiet and glass and years of trust. "She's circling," I said, "like a vulture who took a few business classes." Rachel pushed a folder across the table. "I ran the title reports, asset searches, corporate tie-ins. She's been laying the groundwork for guardianship proceedings." My stomach turned. "She's naming Matthew as co-guardian?" I asked. Rachel hesitated. "Worse. She's drafting you as voluntarily requesting it, with witnesses." My fingers tightened around the folder. I went home that evening and tore through the drawers in my study, something I hadn't done in years. Behind an old tax binder I found it, cream-colored paper, neatly clipped, no envelope. "Temporary Financial Guardianship Declaration, Frank Delaney." Signed. But not by me. It was my signature, copied, scanned, placed delicately on the bottom like a borrowed coat on someone else's back. My heart thudded once, hard and low, like a warning bell in my ribs. The date on the document was last Thursday, the same day Paige had offered to clean up the office while I rested. She never rested. She planned. I sat back in the chair, the page trembling slightly in my hand, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel insulted or even afraid. I felt ready. Whatever illusions of family I'd been clinging to, shared dinners, smiling grandkids, Matthew's conflicted glances, they collapsed in that moment like a card house hit by wind. Paige hadn't just tried to erase me. She was riding over me. And I knew now the time for quiet observation was over. It was time to answer. It's funny how betrayal doesn't sound like a crash. It sounds like sprinklers in the yard, birds in the trees, the clink of a coffee mug against the kitchen sink. Everything normal, everything quiet, until you realize someone forged your name and tried to sell off your future like an old shed in the backyard. The guardianship document Paige had slipped into my file drawer was signed by C. Mercer, a notary I didn't recognize. So I called Rachel the next morning. "I want to find this notary," I said. She didn't even ask why. By the afternoon she'd tracked him down. Calvin Mercer, semi-retired, ran mobile notarizations out of Schenectady. Rachel arranged a phone call. "Mr. Delaney?" he answered. "You're the father-in-law, right? I remember Paige." "Did we ever meet in person?" I asked. He paused. "No, sir. She said you were unwell and couldn't leave the house. She said you signed the forms in front of your son, and he'd confirm everything." "I just came by for the stamps." "And did you see me sign anything?" "No. Paige said it was already done." I thanked him and hung up. Felony, right there. Fraudulent notarization of a guardianship document under false pretenses. Rachel confirmed it in writing. We had what we needed, but I wasn't calling the police, not yet. That afternoon I found Matthew in the backyard fixing the fence. I watched him for a while, head down, focused, sweat on his shirt collar. "Matt," I said, handing him the document. He looked at it, blinked, read. "I didn't sign this," he said. "But you knew," I said. He didn't deny it. "She said you'd been forgetting things, said you needed help." His voice was quiet, like he was already halfway down a tunnel. "I needed help with the groceries," I said. "Not with my signature. Not with my legacy." He sat down on the grass, holding the paper like it had burned him. "I didn't know she forged it. But you didn't ask either." We sat in silence for a while, two men separated by years and now by a woman who wore her ambition like perfume. "I can't lose her," he said. "I can't lose the kids." And there it was, the core of it, the reason betrayal always finds room to grow. Fear, need, weak men who'd rather be tolerated than alone. I stood up. "You already lost something, son, and if you don't know what, you're not ready to get it back." That night I took out the original trust paperwork and contacted the bank holding the assets. I initiated the transfer of custodianship to a separate financial entity, one that Paige and Matthew couldn't touch. Rachel would oversee the paperwork. I would oversee the rest. No one would erase me again. Not quietly, not legally, not ever. The transfer cleared on a Wednesday morning. I sat at the bank with Rachel beside me and a new fiduciary, David Kingsley, a stiff but honest man in his 50s who handled generational trusts for 3 judges and a mayor. He'd now be the only one, outside of me, with access to the assets. "No family members," I said. "Not now. Not ever." He nodded. "That's our policy, Mr. Delaney." Outside, the leaves were starting to turn. A sharp October wind pushed against the glass. It felt like something had shifted, not just legally, but spiritually. I wasn't just protecting money anymore. I was reclaiming ground. When I got home, the mailbox was already leaning open with one letter poking out. No return address. Inside, a single page, a printout of an email. From Paige Delaney to Melissa Harlan, Family Law. Subject, Emergency Filing, Guardianship Inquiry. I believe my father-in-law's cognitive decline is accelerating. He has lost track of appointments, conversations, and his medications. My husband and I are concerned for his safety and that of our children. We'd like to explore an expedited guardianship petition. I believe we can move forward within 30 days. There was a timestamp, 3 days ago. I stared at it, cold, settling in my bones like winter had arrived early. She wasn't just circling anymore. She was ready to strike. But what she didn't know, what she never understood, was that I wasn't just some retired old man with a bad knee and a pension. I was a builder, a planner. A man who spent his whole life reading the fine print before anyone else even noticed there was a contract on the table. I picked up the phone and called Matthew. "I want a meeting," I said. "Just the 3 of us. You, Paige, and me. No lawyers. Just family. We need to talk about the future." He hesitated. "What future?" "The one where you don't lose everything." We agreed on Sunday night. My house, living room, no kids. I spent the next 2 days preparing. Not emotionally, those feelings were already worn down like river rocks, but strategically. I printed every document. The forged guardianship form, Dr. Stein's neurological report, the trust transfer receipt, Rachel's summary of the notary conversation, a timeline of incidents, each dated and notarized. I laid them out on the dining table like chess pieces. Not to attack, but to reveal, to remind them who they were dealing with. Sunday came. They arrived late. Paige in a crisp white sweater, Matthew in silence. She looked at the papers before she sat down, scanning quickly, then met my eyes. "What is this?" "You said I was declining," I said, "that I was losing grip. I wanted to show you what a man losing grip can still do." Matthew shifted uncomfortably, but Paige didn't blink. She was still calculating, still framing her next move. "You can't stop what's coming," she said quietly. "That's where you're wrong," I replied. "I already have." She didn't ask what I meant. She just sat back in her chair, suddenly very quiet, as the weight of her own footsteps began catching up with her. Paige scanned the documents one by one, her manicured fingers twitching just slightly at the corners. "This looks dramatic," she said, voice syrupy. "Frank, we could have talked about all this. You didn't need to involve lawyers." I leaned back in the chair I'd built with my own hands back in '94, the one with the carved armrests and uneven legs. "You mean like the conversation you had with a notary I never met?" I asked. Her jaw stiffened. "I was trying to help you." "No," I said calmly. "You were trying to replace me." Matthew's eyes flicked from her to me, caught in some middle world between guilt and paralysis. "Dad," he said, "we didn't mean for this to get messy." "This wasn't messy," I said. "It was deliberate. You just didn't think I'd see it coming." Paige crossed her legs. "You're taking this way too personally. We were worried about your safety. You've been forgetting things. Repeating stories." I reached into the folder and pulled out Dr. Stein's assessment, tossed it gently across the table. Certified cognitive capacity, dated, signed, backed by a specialist I've known longer than you've been alive. She didn't touch it, just stared. "You told a lawyer I was a risk to my grandchildren. You signed my name on a document I never saw. You contacted my doctor behind my back. And now you're sitting here pretending it was all out of love." I leaned forward, voice low, steady. "You don't get to bury a man and call it gardening." Matthew said nothing. I slid the next page forward, Rachel's transcript of her call with the notary. "He remembers you, Paige. Remembers how you said I was too ill to meet. Said you'd have Matthew confirm everything. Funny thing, Calvin Mercer records all his visits for insurance purposes. We've got it, the silence, the lie, the timestamp." She blinked. "But that's not legal. You can't." "No," I said. "You can't. And now you won't." I watched her recalibrate in real time, scanning for a new angle. I'd seen it before. Clients caught in a lie, too far in to backtrack, too proud to retreat. Matthew looked up. "Is this true?" he asked her. She didn't answer. "Paige?" Still silence. And in that silence, something shifted in the room. Not forgiveness, not peace, just clarity. I stood up and placed the last document on the table, a notarized affidavit removing Matthew as successor trustee. Rachel had filed it 3 days earlier. Kingsley now held exclusive control. The trust is locked, every asset moved, every power revoked. Your name won't appear in another line of my future. Paige stood slowly. You'll die alone, she said, a whisper full of venom. No, I said, walking to the door. I'll die honest. Can you say the same? I opened the door. They left without another word. The house creaked again after the door shut, this time not in warning, this time in relief. The house was still, not the uneasy quiet of secrets, not the tense silence of strategy, just still. No voices through thin walls, no whispers outside my door, no Paige pacing in the kitchen with her phone pressed to her jaw, no Matthew hovering, half present, half apologetic, just the tick of the old wall clock and the creak of the radiator as October pressed in. And yet, for the first time in months, I could breathe. I spent the first 2 days after they left cleaning things that didn't need cleaning, oil on the hinges, dust off the picture frames, refolded the laundry I'd already put away. Not because anything was wrong, but because when the war ends, the hands forget how to rest. I started calling people I hadn't spoken to in years, old clients, colleagues from the courthouse. Harold Nix, the bailiff who used to bring me peppermint candy after trials. Said he still kept my closing statement framed in his garage. That made me smile. Not because it meant anything now, but because it reminded me who I used to be before all this. Someone trusted, someone listened to. One afternoon there was a knock on the door. I opened it to see a small figure in a purple hoodie holding a handmade card. Grandpa? It was Lily, my granddaughter. 8 years old, Paige's daughter. She held up the card, construction paper, glitter glue, shaky letters. "Sorry Mom was mean," it said in crooked purple crayon. "I still love you." I knelt down and hugged her. Not too tight, not too long, just enough to remind myself that not everything had been poisoned. "Where's your mom?" I asked. "In the car," she said. "She said I could give you this, but not to come outside." I looked past her. Sure enough, Paige's SUV, engine running, windows up, her silhouette turned away. Even now, she couldn't look me in the eye. Lily ran back to the car, waving as she climbed in. I stood at the door for a long time after they drove away, love and warning in the same package. That night, I opened my old journals. Not the legal ones, the personal ones. The ones I stopped writing in when Susan died. And I began again, not to document war, but to remember how to live, because I knew now Paige might be retreating, but she wasn't finished. And while the bank accounts were safe and the trust locked, there were other things still vulnerable. Memory, reputation, love, and those, too, would need defending. The call came on a Tuesday morning, just after I'd poured my second cup of coffee. "Frank," said the voice, low and cautious. "It's Theo. You didn't hear this from me, but Paige's name has been floating around the family law circles again." I didn't say anything, just listened. "She's not going back to court, not yet, but she's letting things slip. Casual comments, strategic gossip, saying you're unstable, that she's worried about your mental health, that she tried to help you and you turned violent." I leaned back in my chair and exhaled slowly. "I figured she'd try again," I said. Theo sighed. "I've known you 30 years, Frank. You're one of the sharpest, most principled men I ever met. But people don't fact-check rumors. They just pass them along." And that's when I realized Paige had changed strategies. She didn't need the court to win. She just needed the world to stop listening to me. That afternoon, I got calls from 2 neighbors I hadn't heard from in weeks. "Hey, Frank, everything all right over there?" "Just checking in. Heard you've been having a rough time." Nobody said where they heard it. They never do. Rumor travels faster than fire and leaves fewer fingerprints. I sat with it for a while. Let the ache settle. The kind that comes not from what's been taken, but from what's been twisted. And then I made a decision. I called the people who mattered. Not everyone, just the handful who knew me before Paige arrived on the scene. The men who sat beside me in courtrooms, the women who sent cards after Susan passed, the old clients who still sent fruit at Christmas. I invited them to dinner, not a party, a table, 12 chairs, one truth. I cooked myself, roast chicken, garlic potatoes, Susan's cornbread recipe, set the table with linen napkins, lit the good candles. I even put on the jazz records I hadn't touched in years. They arrived, coats dusted with the October chill, eyes curious. And after we'd eaten, I stood at the head of the table. "I'm not here to ask for pity," I said, "or defend myself. I'm here to tell the truth. Once. Plain." And I did. I told them about the hospital, the forged documents, the notary, the trust. I told them about the silence, the betrayal, the way being old doesn't mean being stupid, but how quickly people start treating you like you are. No one interrupted. When I finished, there was a pause, not of doubt, but of grief. Then someone raised a glass. To Frank, for still knowing who he is. There were nods, small toasts, quiet murmurs of, I'm so sorry. Not for the money, not for the legal mess, but for the loneliness of being right too late. After they left, I sat by the window watching the taillights disappear down the street. Paige might still have her whispers, but I had something better. I had my name back. It was the school that called. Mr. Delaney? The secretary asked, chipper but cautious. Just confirming Lily's absence today, she listed you as the family contact. My hand tightened around the phone. Lily's not here, I said. She hasn't been here in weeks. A pause. Then, oh, well, the note was signed with your name. I hung up gently and stared at the floor for a long time. This wasn't just a rumor anymore. Paige had begun using my name outside the house. Institutions, forms, places where records live longer than memories. I didn't call her, didn't storm her driveway or demand answers. I made an appointment. The next morning I shaved, put on the navy blazer Susan used to love, and drove to Lily's school with a folder under my arm. I met with the assistant principal, a kind woman named Carla. Her eyes were sharp. Her tone was guarded. I just want to clarify, I said. I'm of sound mind. I live alone. I have no custody or guardianship over Lily. Any form saying otherwise is incorrect. She nodded slowly. We've had inconsistencies, some conflicting contacts. I appreciate your clarity. I gave her copies of Dr. Stein's assessment and Rachel's notarized affidavit. This is who I am, I said. Not what someone says I am. She glanced at the papers. Thank you, Mr. Delaney. We'll update the records. I left through the back exit. Didn't want to pass the main hallway where Lily's class might be. I couldn't bear the chance she'd look at me and not know which version of me to believe. That night I sat at the kitchen table with my old photo albums, not to mourn, just to remember. A younger Frank, arms wrapped around a toddler Matthew, Susan in her garden, Lily's tiny hand gripping mine at the zoo, both of us laughing at nothing. I wrote her a letter, not to give now but to leave behind. It said, if you ever hear stories about me that feel wrong, trust your memory. Trust the version of me who made you pancakes and called you Peanut. That was the real me. That still is. I sealed it, labeled it, and placed it in the back of my journal. Because Paige may win in whispers and papers, but I'll win where it matters. In the memory of a child who once believed I could fix anything. The days after the school call were quiet in a way that didn't feel peaceful. I wasn't angry anymore. I was tired. Not the kind that sleep fixes, but the kind that comes when even your name doesn't belong to you anymore. When you see pieces of yourself floating in other people's mouths, twisted into warnings, questions, character traits you never owned. I stopped answering most calls, let the machine take them. And then one rang through that made me freeze mid-step. Frank? Said the voice. It's June, Susan's sister. I hadn't spoken to her in over a year, not since before the hospital. She always called at strange times. This one was no different. I heard some things, she said, rumors about guardianship, about you being not yourself. I braced myself. Then she laughed, a sharp, clear thing. "Which is funny," she said, "because you sound exactly like you always have, tired of dealing with fools." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "Come visit," I said. "Please." She arrived the next afternoon with a grocery bag of old photographs and a tin of oatmeal cookies I'd always hated, but still ate out of obligation. We sat at the kitchen table for hours. No strategy, no legal talk, just names, faces, stories. She showed me a picture of Susan from the summer of '81, barefoot in the backyard, holding baby Matthew like he was made of porcelain and thunder. "She'd have skinned Paige alive," June said. I nodded, with a smile. Later, over coffee, June looked at me with that same sideways glance Susan used to give when she was about to say something hard. "You know this isn't just about the trust, right?" I looked at her. "This is about the story people tell after you're gone. You either write it now, or Paige does." That night, I dusted off the old tape recorder in my closet, pressed record, and began to speak. About Susan, about Matthew, about building the house, the first check I ever wrote, the way Lily looked the day she was born. I didn't do it for court. I did it because June was right. This wasn't just a defense, it was a preservation of memory, of character, of the man I still was beneath all this wreckage. I left the recorder running long after I'd stopped talking, just to prove that my voice still lived here. The envelope was thin, government stamped, and trembling in my mailbox like it knew it shouldn't be there. It wasn't a lawsuit, it was worse. A formal complaint had been filed with the Office for the Aging, an anonymous grievance claiming I was no longer capable of living alone, that I was at risk of harming myself or being financially exploited. I didn't need to guess who sent it. Paige wasn't trying to take the trust anymore. She was trying to take my autonomy, one quiet, bureaucratic paper cut at a time. I called Rachel immediately. She didn't sound surprised. "We can't stop them from coming," she said, "but we can make sure they leave knowing exactly who you are." We scheduled the visit. I cleaned the house top to bottom, not to impress, but to erase any shadow they might try to shape into something it wasn't. I laid out my folders, the medical report, the notarized logs, the documents Paige forged, even the letter from Lily. And then I sat on the couch, hands steady, waiting. The caseworker arrived alone, young, polite, eyes scanning everything. Her name was Dana. She asked soft questions, took soft notes. "How are you managing your meals, Mr. Delaney?" "I cook," I said. "I clean. I've kept myself alive for 68 years. I think I can handle another few." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "And your finances?" "Documented, secured, monitored by a third-party fiduciary. All legal." "All recent." She nodded. I showed her the papers. I didn't plead. I didn't beg. I told the truth. And then I said something I hadn't planned to. "My daughter-in-law believes that aging is weakness, that once a man stops building things, he becomes something to manage. But I've built more in silence these past 6 months than she has in her whole life of noise." Dana stopped writing. I looked her in the eye. "You don't need to save me. You need to recognize that I was never drowning." She stayed for another 20 minutes, checked the kitchen, the fridge, glanced at my medication logs, which I'd kept religiously since the hospital. When she left, she shook my hand and said, "We'll follow up in writing." No apology, no reassurance, just protocol. But in her eyes, I saw it. Not pity, doubt. The kind Paige couldn't control. The kind that grows in silence and takes root in systems designed for paperwork, not people. And that was enough. I sat at the kitchen table as snow began to fall outside, and I felt the war shift again, not won but weathered. And still I stood. The letter came 2 weeks later. Plain envelope, thin paper, government seal. I opened it slowly, like peeling off a scab. No findings of impairment or risk. Case closed. That was it. No apology, no acknowledgement of harm done. Just silence. Again. A silence I'd earned, but didn't want. I set the letter down and stared out the window. Snow still clung to the fence posts, ice on the mailbox. I had won. But it didn't feel like winning, because even when you clear your name, the echo of accusation doesn't just vanish. It lingers, in neighbors' eyes, in old voicemails, in the way your own reflection looks back at you, asking if any of this was worth it. Then came the knock. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door cautiously. Matthew. No Paige, no kids. Just him, standing on the porch with red eyes and a blue folder under his arm. "Can I come in?" I didn't answer, just stepped aside. He sat on the couch like it was foreign, like it belonged to someone else. "I'm sorry," he said, voice low. "I should have stopped her sooner." I didn't respond. He opened the folder. Inside were emails, notes, printouts of conversations between Paige and a financial consultant, one that showed her next move was to try and sue the fiduciary company for improper transition. "She wasn't done," he said, "even after the investigation, even after you locked everything down." I nodded. "That's who she is." He looked up. "I didn't know how to stop her." "You didn't want to," I said, "not until you realized she was willing to burn everything, including you." He didn't deny it. We sat in silence for a while. Then he said something I didn't expect. "She told Lily you forgot her name." I closed my eyes. "She's 8, he said. "She asked me why Grandpa doesn't love her anymore." That's when the anger cracked, not with fire, but with grief. I stood up and pulled out the letter I'd written weeks ago, the one for Lily. I handed it to him. "Give this to her when she's ready. When you are." Matthew held it like it might shatter. "What about us?" he asked. I looked at him, not as my son, but as a man who had watched someone else write his story. "You want something from me?" I said. "Then you bring me truth." "Not tears." He nodded slowly, and left without another word. Outside, the snow began to melt. Not all at once, but enough to see the ground again. Rachel called just before dinner. "You're not going to believe this," she said, voice heavy with fatigue. "Try me." Paige didn't file a lawsuit. She filed a grievance with Matthew's church board and with the parent-teacher council at Lily's school. Claims you've been spreading lies, undermining family values, manipulating Matthew through guilt. I closed my eyes. "She's playing the morality card," I said. Rachel sighed. "She knows she can't beat you legally, so now she's trying to shame you out of the room." "Shame doesn't work on people who've already lost everything," I said. But the truth was, it still stung. Later that week I got a knock on the door. Not Matthew. Not Paige. It was Althea Green, widow, organist, gossip magnate-in-chief. "I thought you should know," she said, stepping inside before I could stop her. "There's talk going around. Nasty things. But I also thought you should know, not everyone's buying it." She handed me a printed email thread. Anonymous sources forwarding Paige's claims to the church council, then to the PTA. Pages of polite venom dressed in religious concern. "She says you've been poisoning the family," Althea said, "that you're angry, dangerous." I sat down, hands steady. "I'm none of those things." "I know," she said, "but people out there don't, unless you tell them." I wasn't a man for public speeches, never liked town halls or testimonials, but I knew when silence became complicity, so I wrote a letter, simple, honest, 1 page. "My name is Frank Delaney. I am a father, a grandfather, and a man who spent 40 years protecting people through law, not harming them. I have been accused of many things recently, not in court, but in whispers, not with facts, but with fear. I will not respond to every rumor. I will not relive every betrayal. But I will say this. My love for my family does not excuse their actions, and their actions do not erase who I am. If you believe in fairness, listen. If you believe in justice, ask. If you believe in silence, then believe whatever you want. But I will not disappear quietly." Althea passed it to the church board. Others shared it through email threads. A few copies even ended up posted on the community board at the post office. The next Sunday, someone slid a note into my mailbox. "I believe you." No name, no address, just 5 words, enough to remind me, a man is not what others say. He is what he refuses to let them take. It started with a card, blue envelope, no return address. Inside, a note written in tight cursive. "You defended my son in 2003. We still talk about what you did. Don't let them make you smaller." I didn't recognize the name, but the handwriting looked like strength. Then came a voicemail from Mrs. Lazenby down the street. "I told that church woman off. Said if they wanted to talk about morals, they could start by asking why you had to defend yourself in the first place." And then Harold Nix, the old bailiff, sent a package. Inside, a framed clipping of my first big trial, and a typed note that simply read, "Still standing." The support didn't fix what had been done, but it reminded me that Page had underestimated one thing. Memory. Not just mine, everyone's. You don't spend decades doing right by people without some of them remembering when it counts. Still, the ache remained. Not just from the battle, but from the empty chair across from me each morning, from the dinner table where Susan used to correct my grammar, from the ghost of laughter that no longer filled the hallway. So one morning I packed a thermos of coffee and drove to the cemetery. Susan's grave sat under a thin crust of snow. I brushed it off with my sleeve. "Hey, Red," I said. "You were right about her." The cold didn't bite as hard as it used to. I poured 2 cups from the thermos, set one on the ground beside her. "She tried to erase me," I said. "Came close too. But I've still got my name, my hands, my damn sharp tongue." I smiled. Matthew came by. He's waking up. I don't know if he'll ever really come back, but I'm not chasing him anymore. The wind rustled the dry trees behind me. "I miss you." I let the words sit. Not because she could hear, but because I needed to know I could still say them. I sat with her until the coffee went cold, and the snow started again, soft and slow like someone forgiving the world. And when I stood to leave, I felt something strange. Lightness. Like the war didn't own me anymore. Like I'd stepped out of a story someone else was writing, and back into my own. The envelope had Matthew's handwriting on it. No email, no text. Just ink. The kind of message that costs something to send. I read it slowly. "Dad, I've been a coward. I let her convince me that love meant silence. That protecting her meant surrendering you. I thought I was choosing peace, but I was just avoiding truth. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't know if I'd forgive me either. But I want to tell you something. I see it now. All of it. What she did. What I didn't do. I don't live in that house anymore. I'm getting my own place. I don't want to be the man who watched his father get erased. I want to be someone my daughter can trust. If you ever want to talk, really talk, I'll be here. I read it twice, then a third time. The first thing I felt wasn't relief, it was grief for the years lost, the birthdays half-lived, the holidays strained, the 1,000 small betrayals that built up like rust between us. I sat at the kitchen table with the letter flat in front of me and stared out the window. The snow was gone now. The ground was bare. Honest. I took out a fresh sheet of paper, and I didn't write a speech. I wrote an answer. Matthew, you're not a coward. You were afraid. There's a difference. Fear makes us freeze. Cowardice makes us lie. You've stopped lying. That's something. I won't pretend nothing happened, but I won't throw you away either. If you want to rebuild, we do it like anything worth saving, slow, steady, with our own hands. No page, no pretending, just truth. I'm here, not as the man you used to know, but maybe as the man you still need. I folded it, stamped it, sent it. I didn't know if he'd reply, but I knew this. The war was over. Now came the harder part, the rebuilding. Spring came late that year. The snow dragged its heels, reluctant to leave, like even the seasons didn't trust the peace. But eventually, the trees began to bud again. The breeze changed, the ground softened, and so did I. I found rhythm in the quiet, mornings spent walking the block, afternoons reading old case briefs in the courthouse library, volunteer work just a few hours a week, enough to keep the gears turning. Sunday dinners became a thing again, just me and Althea Green, who insisted on calling it a standing date, even though we mostly argued about jazz records and too much salt. I wasn't healed. I was simply living again. Matthew wrote twice a month, always in his own hand, never asking for too much. We weren't rebuilding a house. We were building a bridge. One slow board at a time. Then one Saturday the doorbell rang. I opened it to see Lily. She was taller, hair longer, still had that nervous way of holding one sleeve when she was unsure. Behind her Matthew stood, not pushing her forward, just waiting. "Hi, Grandpa," she said. My throat caught. "I brought you something." She handed me a folded sheet of construction paper. Inside, a drawing of 2 stick figures on a porch swing. A third figure stood beside them, holding hands. "That's you," she said, pointing to the one on the swing. "And that?" "That's Dad," she smiled. "He said we could come today." No page, just them, just us. I stepped aside and opened the door. They walked in slowly, looking around like it was a place they thought they'd forgotten but never really had. We didn't talk about what had been lost. We just sat at the kitchen table and passed the hours like they were old friends we hadn't seen in a while. And in that quiet, I understood something. Legacy isn't what you put in a trust. It's not the money, the house, the name on the deed. It's what remains when people try to rewrite you. It's the part of you that refuses to vanish. That night, after they left, I stood in the doorway, one hand on the frame. I looked out at the yard, the porch swing, and I whispered something I hadn't said in a long time. I'm still here. Not erased, not forgotten, just here.